Ready? All right. Hey everyone, my name is Will Palmieri. I'm here today with Ronnie Chen from PayPal's San Francisco office. We're here today to talk about hiring and onboarding for your Scala team. First, quick disclaimer, we're sharing our personal experiences and the views we're talking about are not necessarily those of PayPal or eBay. With that out of the way, let me start with some background on our current engineering team for some context. About half of our team is from a startup that I co-founded called StackMob. We built a backend as a service for mobile application developers. We first adopted Scala in the 2.8 days and used early versions of Akka and Lyft. In 2013, StackMob was acquired by PayPal. We brought our love for Scala with us, and I officially moved into middle management. I helped grow our team from StackMob and PayPal to 15 engineers. We're a pretty seasoned Scala team at this point, building backend services for PayPal on the Scala, Akka, and Spray stack. And so we're really excited about where Scala and Akka are heading and the technologies being discussed at this conference at Scala Days. But it takes a really good team to apply these technologies and build something special. I'm very proud of the diverse team that we've built at PayPal, with most of us not really having any prior Scala experience. And so I'd like to talk about our hiring process and share some of our best practices for developing Scala engineers and growing our community. When you're in the process of building your team, you need to treat hiring as a first-class job function. As I stepped into management, I was easily spending a third of my time sourcing and managing the hiring process. Hiring is really hard to do right. Hiring the wrong person can negatively affect your entire team. So whether you're a founder, middle management, senior engineer on the team, I highly suggest not leaving it all up to recruiters. Hiring is one of the most important things you can do as a technical leader. And done right, it's really incredibly rewarding. So before you can begin, you need to define what you're looking for in the role and what interests you in an engineer. At StackMob and PayPal, we actually don't look specifically for Scala engineers or functional programming purists, just people that are passionate about engineering, that want to continue to learn and expand their skill sets, and demonstrated experience with technologies matters way more than having a big name from a specific school or company on a resume. Referrals are awesome, but eventually your personal network is going to dry up. In this market, you can't just write a job description, post it online, and hope to get a bunch of qualified people. To get the best candidates, you're going to have to spend a lot of time sourcing and contacting people personally. We send messages to people on LinkedIn, Stack Overflow. We participate in Hire.com auctions, go to conferences like Scala Days, etc. I can't prove it, but I have personally seen a better response rate for well-written technical emails and messages to engineers from a hiring manager talking about a specific team, a specific role, as compared to kind of more generic cold calls from recruiters. You definitely want to keep track of the candidates that you reach out to over time. We use a Trello board internally to manage the entire process. You could easily be contacting like 100 people for a single hire, so you want to have kind of a record of how that process is going. And I definitely want to say that diversity matters a lot. It takes effort. You don't want to hire a bunch of clones of yourself. It only handicaps your future ability to hire and work with awesome people. A great team contains a variety of perspectives, backgrounds, and abilities. And it's easy to say that you support diversity in the workplace. I think we all do. That's kind of the baseline. But what's hard is to make sure that it actually happens. So when you get some interest from a good candidate, first set up a 30-minute reach-out call. I approach this call basically as if the candidate is interviewing myself. You go into total sell mode. You want to sell the vision of the company and what we're doing, what we can accomplish. And more importantly, you're selling the team and the culture. You talk about your tech stack, coding practices, interesting problems that engineers are solving. And as I'm doing this the entire time, I really want to be checking that the candidate shares kind of your vision and values. You also want to talk about the hiring process itself with the candidate and remove all ambiguity from the process. You're looking for great engineers, not people that are great at just interviewing. And at this point, enthusiasm, communication from the candidate are extremely strong indicators. Are they asking follow-up questions? At this point, both parties should be really eager and excited to move on to the next step. Next step would be tech phone screen, which we would conduct with an engineer on our team. It would take about 45 minutes. At this point, absolutely need to make sure that we're talking with people that can write good, solid code. So we like to use the online collaborative code editor. We use Codasium with our team at PayPal. It's worked really well for us. Implementation language at this point doesn't really matter. We're checking for familiarity with data structures and algorithms, etc. Again, screening for communication, enthusiasm. Are they explaining their thought process, asking for clarifications when necessary? Are they addressing edge cases, checking for bugs? And at this point, I can definitively say that any candidate worth hiring should not require a second phone screen. I think some companies like to do 2 tech screens. I've found that it's basically a waste of our time, a waste of the candidate's time, and just don't do it. Next would be bringing the candidate in for an on-site interview. We like to do a panel of 4 or 5 engineers with the hiring manager. Each person talk with the candidate for about 45 minutes. At this point, before the candidate comes in, again, you want to prep them, give them an idea of what to expect. And you also want to prep your entire team and the panel. Everyone should have good guidelines of what you're looking for in the candidate and for the specific position. And you want to talk ahead of time and make sure that everyone is covering different topics, asking different questions, and getting a complete holistic view of the candidate. And again, you don't want just the most senior people from your team on the panel. We found it's really good to get a diverse panel, both for collecting different perspectives on the candidate, as well as being able to attract the best candidates. So you're going to do some coding on the on-site. No one likes to whiteboard. I definitely recommend bringing in a laptop and working on a code editor when possible. And at this point, you really want to get the candidate excited about working in Scala. One thing we like to do is, if they're not familiar with Scala, have them write something in Java or Python, and then show the Scala equivalent. An example I like to do: ask a question, write a simple function, find the top n most frequently occurring strings, and a generic list of strings. In Java, this can typically take 20 or 30 lines of code. You're going to use a bunch of different data structures. Might have to use a custom comparator, and it's a good way to show off some different data structures, etc. But in Scala, you could definitely do it in 1 line of code. This, say the caveat, maybe not the most efficient solution possible, but it uses a bunch of different features of the language and is a way to get the conversation going. Show things like higher order functions, mapping, implicit parameters. You want to make sure that the candidate is able to understand these functional constructs, even if they haven't seen them before. And we can also go in the reverse direction. We could show the candidate a higher order Scala function, explain the syntax if necessary, and ask them to implement that solution in Java. So here's a function, add 1, given a function that accepts, given the argument of a function that takes an integer, returns an integer. It's going to invoke that function with the parameter +1 and return that as a function. There's lots of functions in here, but the point is if the candidate can wrap their head around this and display comfort in treating functions as first-class objects, then that really goes a long way to showing kind of an intuition for functional programming. We also like to ask more open-ended systems-level questions that are going to require more design and analysis. One of our typical go-tos is how would you develop a URL shortener service for Twitter, and then how would you scale that to handle millions of requests concurrently? This should really be an engaging back-and-forth discussion. Some of our interviewers will actually ask a design question that's almost intentionally vague, and to see where the candidate goes with it. Do they immediately take it and run with it? Do they ask for follow-up questions, clarify some of their own implicit assumptions? It should be a really good discussion. This is also a good way for more senior candidates to discuss more advanced architecture and concepts. And it really shouldn't be limiting where the conversation goes. This should be basically fun for both parties and just kind of see where it goes from there. Again, the entire time focusing on communication skills, which in our experience are just as good or just as important as raw coding skills for making a quality engineer on the team. You can ask the candidate to explain the architecture and design of one of their favorite projects. You can go into what was fun about it, what technologies did you learn, what did you use, what didn't go so well, what was the hardest bug, and how did you figure it out and address it. One of my favorite interviews was asking a candidate, or a candidate explained to me how he implemented algebraic data types in Haskell and had a ton of fun with it. And I think in the process he wound up explaining something new to me that I wasn't familiar with, which can be really, really fun in an interview setting. You can also delve into something that the candidate doesn't have as much experience with themselves and see if they can apply it. One of our favorites on our team is going into more advanced distributed system concepts, talking about consistency models and serializability. And the point is, again, just kind of start the conversation, see how much the candidate can grasp, how much they're familiar with kind of the more abstract concepts. And for the more junior candidates, you want to see that they're coachable, willing to ask questions, and kind of learn these new topics. Quick side note on culture fit and the hiring process. Culture fit is extremely important. It's going to vary across companies. It's going to vary across teams within companies. I think this could really be a whole talk in and of itself. My co-founder actually has given a talk on this topic. What I like to say, though, is that culture fit is not a code word to exclude those different from you. It's not about who you want to get a beer with after work. It's about who do you want to work with when you start on a new project. Culture fit is it's coming to the agreement with a candidate that you have shared values, shared commitments in your engineering environment. So once the candidate has left, it becomes time to make a decision. All of our panelists will come to the table ready with feedback. Ideally, this discussion should be completely independent of other candidates, but rather in the context of how would they complement the existing team? Do they bring new perspectives, a new background, and can they have a unique kind of addition to the team? When we're ready to make a decision, everyone kind of go to count of three, everyone gives thumbs up, thumbs down, go around the table, everyone discuss kind of their reasoning, how they arrived at that, how they arrived at their vote. And basically we need to come to a unanimous consensus within 15 minutes, and everyone should be excited at this point about the candidate. If there's any kind of single person that has strong reservations, then we have to pass, because again, having that important culture fit and kind of excitement about the candidate is super important. And at this point, we definitely want to make an effort to get back to the candidate with a firm decision within the next 2 days. I've been going on and on about how important communication is from the candidate. It's just as important for us talking with them and keeping them up to date and informed about the process. When you're ready to extend an offer, be decisive. It's a great time to be in the job market for engineers right now, so be prepared to pay up. The best talent in our experience is absolutely worth it, and going through this process takes a lot of time and investment within your own team. Set a deadline for when the candidate needs to either accept or decline the offer, and then stick to it. Otherwise, they're going to keep shopping around, talking to other companies, asking for extensions. This has definitely happened with us, and it does not end well. I'm talking from experience, so stick to your deadlines. Again, you want to track the funnel, the metrics, how many people are you talking to, where do they drop out during each stage of the process. If you're bringing in a ton of people on site and not making that many offers, yes, you could say maybe you have a very rigorous kind of interview process, but at the same time, that's a big investment of your engineer's time, and over time, people are going to burn out. So you definitely want to be tracking kind of how is this process working for you within your organization. So candidate accepts the offer, awesome. The big question now is how do we integrate them to become a successful member of the team and onboard them. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to an engineer on our team, Ronnie Chen. Thanks.
Okay, so what's next? After the interview is actually the really hard part. There's a lot of articles and think pieces online about how to interview engineers, but not nearly as much is written about the onboarding process. And that's really a shame, because onboarding is where the magic really happens. It's how you get someone from, I have no idea what I'm doing, to, I have some sort of idea what I'm doing. And if I have only one takeaway from my talk, it should be this. Onboarding is also a first-class job function, just like hiring. And so you should be treating it as one. By which I mean you should be putting as much thought and energy and intent behind it as any other job function. And you should be holding yourself as a team accountable for success and having someone specifically oversee the process. I'm talking here about mentors. Getting someone up to speed quickly should be taken as seriously by a mentor as writing code. It's a short-term lull in productivity in exchange for huge long-term gains. And you should have the full support of your team behind it to take the time and do this properly, instead of making it something that you do as a side note when you're not writing code. So when you're onboarding someone, in addition to setting expectations, you should be documenting the process on an internal wiki. And this should be modified when people run into problems. Create checklists for setting up a dev environment, for configuring tools. These are things that should be updated when the processes change, so you always have an up-to-date reference. You shouldn't have to relearn the process and try to remember every bit of minutia with every new hire. That's a waste of everyone's time. Providing good documentation here is how you should actually be trying to shave time off of the process of onboarding. You don't want to take that from the one-on-one time with new engineers. And you want to track your performance and iterate over successive attempts. Again, just as you would with any other first-class job function. Providing the best possible onboarding experience means a lot of communication, both with your new hire, but also between the team members. Our mentors budget a minimum of an hour a day for several weeks, with additional large chunks of time during the week devoted to dedicated guidance as needed. So we do have some assigned reading of pre-existing resources. Most of you probably have a list of go-to introductory guides to Scala. These are the ones that we provide to engineers, but I think everyone is probably familiar with them. You all know about the Scala Coursera classes. Twitter Scala School is fairly succinct and really helpful in showcasing the core features of Scala. The Scala Cookbook is an O'Reilly book with a lot of code examples, and we like to give that out to new hires as well. The Neophyte's Guide to Scala is a collection of blog posts that cover the fundamental concepts and also provides good code examples. So it's definitely useful to have some solid resources to provide, but at the end of the day, what we find is that the best way to really learn Scala is to write Scala. So for us, these are probably the 5 things that are the language features that most new Scala programmers don't understand. So we have for comprehensions, tries, options, pattern matching, and futures. Understanding these concepts is the first step to writing idiomatic Scala instead of Scalified Java or something else. And helping a new engineer learn these things will save you a lot of time on code review. And again, this is something that we learned from experience. A new hire should be introduced to all of these concepts early on in the onboarding process. For example, we explain how for comprehensions are syntactic sugar for monadic mapping, not a kind of imperative loop, which you may expect. Tries are used throughout our code base to explicitly handle exceptions rather than throwing. We mandate the use of options and forbid the use of nulls anywhere in the code base, except when interfacing with Java. We prefer the use of pattern matching to if-else clauses and explain how they work in for comprehensions. And futures can get really tricky because they require an implicit execution context when you're mapping or flat mapping over them. And very important, we forbid an await anywhere in our production code flows. So obviously, in person, we expand these out and use actual code examples. But in addition to these mini lectures, the biggest help in onboarding is really going to be your code base. How do you actually use these concepts? When you're stuck writing new code, what you tend to do is look for guidance in the existing code. How did everyone else do it? What patterns come up over and over again? What are the idioms that you use in the team? And we use the answers to these questions to create two things: our style guide and our open source library. Style guides can be really underrated, but it's very important that code be legible and consistent. The specifics of how to format something is just one aspect of coding style. Much more important is enhancing the readability of your code and maintaining certain conventions so that the focus can be on the substance of the code itself. We take our style guide very seriously during code review, and we'll actually fail builds that fail the style guide. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Editing our style guide requires team buy-in, and there's sometimes a lot of debate and contention before deciding. Now, this may sound obsessive to some of you, but we found that having a style guide really helps the code look cohesive and stay readable. If you don't already use a style guide, maybe you'd like to use ours. So next up is Cascade. Cascade is our open source library of common patterns, convenience objects, and utilities. We treat it as a living resource, and as much as possible, we try to refactor and extract what we can and make it available and reusable. Everything that doesn't go into open source, we try to provide in an internal inner source library so that, again, repeated patterns and convenience objects are available to be reused over and over again. Okay, so now that you have these resources to start with, it's time to write some code. So it's important to set realistic expectations. Skills are built piece by piece. And what we do is aim for a pull request within the first 2 weeks, and if possible, within the first week. What we find is that this really helps the engineer get buy-in on the code base, as well as get acquainted with the entire code integration process. And this gives you a nice short feedback cycle. It works a lot better than giving a new engineer a project that'll take months to complete. One really important thing here is to have a well-groomed backlog so you can actually give someone meaningful work that's bite-sized instead of just busy work. And this is a lot of planning and organizing, but there's a reason why it's really important. And that's because onboarding is a valuable opportunity, and it shouldn't be seen as a burden. New hires see your code with fresh eyes, and this is a gift with an expiration date. There's a strong tendency for new engineers to not ask a lot of questions when they're learning because they don't consider themselves fully fledged members. But the truth is that if they don't ask questions, you're the one that misses out. Every question that comes up during this time is a sign that something is not right, something's not clear enough. Maybe that's a gap in their understanding, in which case that's a time for you to mentor them and help them grasp this concept so that they can use it correctly in the future. But maybe the problem is that you don't have sufficient documentation, or your code is not as readable as it could be, and you've sacrificed clarity in exchange for complexity. Sometimes it could be even a sign of faulty implementation. The point is that they're approaching the code without the baggage that you've picked up over time as you make compromises or trade-offs in your implementation. Inconsistencies in your code implementation, small oversights, even major oversights can all be caught during this time. But once an engineer is fully integrated onto your team, you lose the benefit of their unbiased vision. There's a lot of ugliness that can exist in a code base that you can't see anymore because you live inside of it and you've gotten used to it and gotten blind to it. But if you give a new engineer an opportunity to tell you, they can point these out to you. The questions that they have and the mistakes that they make are valuable information that can tell you where the problem areas lie. So during the onboarding process, we like to have our engineers have ongoing one-on-ones with their mentor. This is a good time for them to ask these questions that we talked about or to clarify some things that they don't understand. We actively invite communication about small problems, and we tell engineers that if they get stuck, to spend 15 minutes trying to figure it out, but after that, go to someone else for help. A new engineer can flounder for days or even weeks without asking someone for support for fear of looking stupid or making you think like you hired the wrong person. But this isn't an effective use of anybody's time. If you demonstrate how to solve problems and teach them how you plan out an implementation and see that through, and even better, if you can document that for the next person, that helps everyone on the team feel like owners of the code and bring them up to speed. Also, as a team, we're very strong believers in code reviews for all of our PRs, but especially for new hires to ensure that we maintain a consistent code base. 100% of our code gets seen by at least 2 sets of eyes before merging, but we actively encourage and welcome more eyes on the code, especially for people who wrote the original implementation or who have knowledge in that particular domain. And again, the reason for this is to increase the feeling of shared ownership of the code base. Once your engineers are successfully shipping code, it's time to gradually build up responsibility. And one of the first steps to do that is to include them in the code review process. Not only is this a good chance for them to be exposed to more code, to read more code, it also helps them build their domain knowledge. It gives them a chance to understand how other parts of the code works, and critically, it teaches them to look at code with a critical eye. To help your team continue on that upward path, it's important to use the right tools and safety equipment. So here are some of the tools that we use to maintain objective standards of quality. Just as a little bit of context here, we have a continuous integration environment using Jenkins. And so one of the things that we do, as I mentioned before, is use Scala Style to enforce style guidelines. And we will fail a build that violates them. If there's ever a reason for you to turn off a specific style rule, that's something that you need to address and specifically justify why you're using it. That's not something that you just casually slip in. And again, this maintains a certain amount of readability and consistency within our code. We enforce compiler warnings, and again, we treat those as failed builds. Failing tests are also considered critical, and for us, a single failing test will fail the build. This is very important to us. We write unit tests and integration tests with specs to prevent regressions, and we mandate a minimum % of test coverage with Jacoco, and we use it to determine which parts of the code base are not covered and need more testing. We also do property-based testing with Scala Check to automatically generate sample data for testing. As you can tell, testing is a big part of our life. We do HTTP benchmarking and performance regression analysis using Gatling, and we also have real-time monitoring to ensure that our services stay performant and healthy. We also try to explore new tools and new ways to maintain the quality of our code base. Just recently, we started playing with Codecee, which does automatic code reviews and generates reports for us. All of the tools that I have listed on this page are triggered by pull requests and new merge commits on develop. By making as much of this process as automated as possible, we keep ourselves honest. Here's another safety item. The bus factor, for those of you who don't know, is the number of critical events necessary to incapacitate your team. So a bus factor of 1 means that one terrible accident means that nothing's getting done. So shared information leads to shared ownership of the code. And we do that with internal tech talks. We maintain active communication and teaching within the team about projects and domains of expertise. The point is that nothing on our team should rely on only one person. You really don't want services to go down if someone is sick or on vacation or hit by a bus. So multiple hats. As engineers start gaining competency, they start to specialize in different roles. Not everyone on your team is going to be a 10x code producer. A well-rounded team really needs people who can slice through hard problems. It needs technical advisors who can find the tools to use. It needs architects, domain experts, people who understand the big problems and can do impact analysis, people who can see the big picture, people who are detail-oriented, people who champion quality code and ensure that only good code gets shipped. So we don't like to judge an engineer solely based on the number of lines of code that they write. There's a lot more hats to be worn on a team, and we want to foster all of the different ways that you can contribute. And that leads to building a good engineering culture. As you build your team, you really want to foster a culture of asking questions, of open conversation. Communication in the team should be a one-to-many relationship. We really try to foster an environment of continued learning. One of the things that we do are regular nerd lunches, where we gather as a team and learn something new together. Usually this is a talk or a paper, but it's open to anything that people find interesting, not just the technology that we work on. We have an engineering chat room that's a place for active discussion and technical debate. And we try to provide proactive support for people who are puzzled or stuck or confused. One of the most important things that we do is make it okay to say, "I don't know." And this phrase is most important coming from the more senior engineers. The reason that we do this is because thinking that you're right isn't the same thing as actually being right. If you think that your implementation is correct and it's the best way to do it, prove it. You might be surprised, but even if you're not, that gives you the satisfaction that you know instead of just assuming. We like to encourage a no stupid questions mentality. We want the team to feel free to question the status quo, and we want them to be engaged in making design and architecture decisions. It shouldn't just be a top-down decision where everyone else is being browbeaten into agreement. Again, this really helps every member of the team feel that they have ownership over the code base. They should all understand it and know why it's the way it is. Even if there's disagreement at this point, you understand that there's a rationale and that your voice was heard. You also want to give people a safe environment to fail in. Code review is about writing better code. It's about shared responsibility. It should never be about shaming. If you find a bug in your code base, that onus is on everybody, not just the person who wrote it. It's about a failure in your process where it couldn't be caught. It's about the people who looked at it. It's about getting more eyes on it. It's about better testing. It's about many things. It's not just about finger pointing. The goal is a process that shepherds all of your engineers towards writing better code. In fact, as time passes, your concept of what constitutes well-written code should change as you gain collective wisdom. Writing great code should be a moving target. And so what we talked about today were the practices that worked for us as a team, and we hope that this will be helpful for you to build your own Scala engineering teams. And with that, if there's any questions? Yeah.
Do you use any code review tools apart from, I assume you work in data?
Yes, yes.
Do you use any code review tools apart from when you run a branch with a pull request and a pull request?
So it's mostly a manual. Oh, let me step over here. Our code reviews are mostly a manual process of going through GitHub. We try to get everyone to, like as we said, to go through look through line by line. Ronnie was mentioning that we just started looking at codicy for kind of more automatic, more high-level type of code reviews, and then tracking metrics of kind of test coverage is also really, really important. And a lot of PRs, there will be more lines of code written on tests than on kind of writing new features, especially working at a financial company where we're handling people's money, and kind of uptime and availability and performance is so important to us. And we have to be really confident about all the code that we're putting into production.
So you couldn't use anything like Jerry until...
We don't right now. I'd love to talk more offline if you have some specific suggestions and something that can help our team. Yeah.
We're using codebase as well, and it's great. Love it. The challenge that we have with it is the delay that it introduces in the development process with this, where there's no IDE plugin. It's like this offline process that interrupts the development process. Do you experience the same thing? Do you have any other experience with other technologies or something similar that can be part of the development flow?
Yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about. I mean, at this point, all I can say is that you want to have all of those processes triggered automatically and kind of be proactively pinging people during the kind of commit, build, and deploy process. I don't think there's a perfect answer, perfect tool out there to do what you're talking about, though.
We have it integrated with Slack, which is really helpful. But it's also disruptive.
Fair. So we didn't get too much into it, but we use HipChat on our team. I do think having everyone in a kind of a collaborative chat room all day is really, really important for communication and team culture. It totally helps that kind of one-to-many type of communication. Anyone can answer questions, pose questions, get quick help with bugs, as well as just kind of an outlet for having fun during the day. So if anyone here is not using HipChat or Slack, I highly, highly recommend it.
Your interview pipeline, how long is it, top to bottom? And also, how many people are doing interviews? And you say as part of this onboarding process, at what point do you bring people into the interview process?
Sure. So a couple questions in there. How big is our pipeline? So what we have found is being able to make the best hires is when you have a couple spots open at a time and you're not kind of forced into this constraint of I need to interview a bunch of people for this one position and then pit everyone else against each other, because then it's like really easy to kind of fall into the mindset of, well, this person is kind of the best of who I've seen so far, and you really just want to be independently excited about each candidate that you're talking with. In terms of bringing people into the interview process, we like to do that basically as soon as onboarding is complete and they feel comfortable as a full-fledged member of our team. I would say after about 3 months. It's not something we force upon all of our engineers, but I like to have a certain amount of rotation amongst kind of the interview panel. It's also a really good experience for the engineers doing the interviewing. It helps them with their communication, just get more exposure to talking with two people with other experiences and sharing what they have learned. I'm pretty passionate about getting as much people involved in the interview process as possible. I will say that at the phone screen stage, we definitely have a couple people that are kind of more of our go-to phone screeners that have gotten really good at it, because it's not as fun and engaging as getting to nerd out with someone in person. So it's important that kind of your phone conversations or Skype or whatever it is, that people doing that are kind of a really good representation of the engineers on your team.
Do you ever look to get any feedback on your process?
Yeah, so that's a great question. In every single kind of personal interview that I do, talking with someone, I like to ask, you're of course making sure, do you have any more questions for me about the position, the team, the process, and then at the end, thank them for coming in, and then in a follow-up email, just kind of make sure that they enjoyed the process, and if they have any more questions or feedback for us, to please let us know. We don't have like a specific kind of questionnaire or making it like being able to collect anonymous feedback. I think that's part of that is just on us to see how the funnel and pipeline is working. But that's definitely something we could do more of. So great question. I think, yeah.
From the hiring process, we understand that you do live coding or coding
Mm-hmm.
in the second interview, I think,
Mm-hmm.
and no assessment. Is there a reason for that you not give somebody an assessment and say, hey, spend at home some 4-8 hours on this, we will review it and invite you later? Everything looks good.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've dabbled in that and kind of giving take-home, exams and kind of to candidates. At a certain point, I think it becomes a turnoff to really good candidates. You're asking them to do free work for you, kind of. It's also pretty easy to go Google stuff online, and there are some new kind of web services that can kind of track people writing code like in real time and play it back to you. That can get pretty cool. But yeah, that I don't think that's always bad. I just don't think it's necessary all the time to get good candidates. Yeah.
So one big monster hole in the Scala community that I found is the absence of any real DevOps talent. Really know how to make it work. So the people I've found, they eschew SMT, they think Native is a much better tool. And interviewing people is proving to be a real challenge. And I haven't heard any real conversation about this. There's not like any experience interviewing good DevOps people for Scala. It is a different animal when it comes to building and deployment.
So it's a great question. The question is about interviewing and hiring for people with more DevOps experience. Yeah, I don't think I have an answer to that.
Can you do some research on that?
So I guess just to interject a little, I came onto the team as an engineer, and so we don't have dedicated DevOps people. We do have several members of the team, myself included, who pick up the slack when we need DevOps. And so again, when I talked about wearing many hats, this was one of the things that came up. When we have new services, when we're tinkering with Jenkins, when other services that we rely on go down, this is something that shows up in HipChat. This is something that the whole team is alerted about. And we try to give everybody on the team an opportunity to learn about this. And we have, again, wiki documentation so that even if we don't have any DevOps engineers like in the room at the time, there's a page that you can go to, and it's slower, and you may not have all of the expertise, but you can figure stuff out. We really rely a lot on good documentation and good communication. And we try to, again, pass on that information. We do internal tech talks, and you try to look for people who are interested. Maybe not specifically for DevOps, but I want to learn more about how to keep our services healthy, even if it's just sort of because if I don't, I can't do any of my own development. And people who care about the entirety of the process. And what we do is train each other to do that as opposed to specifically select. And so again, part of this ties back to hiring inquisitive people, hiring people who are really passionate about the entire process and share our values. Because I think if you, when that happens, you have people who care about making sure that all the pieces of your environment are working together.
I'll add one more thing. I think another small way that can be a good indicator is kind of candidates that took the time to go beyond kind of small projects, like for junior engineers especially, kind of small projects in the classroom versus kind of exploring something like a personal project, outside the classroom, getting something up on, putting some code up on GitHub, deploying an app to Heroku, putting it in Docker, and just, even if it's not something that's super large in scale, but kind of having a small personal project that you kind of develop from start to finish and have a web server out there accepting requests and shows a working product. There's a lot of just kind of personal DevOps that go into making that happen.
Do you have any examples for like onboarding tasks? Say you have to prep do a lot of preparation for people who like doing stuff. And in my personal experience, fixing bugs are like good tasks to learn a system, but they could be very frustrating for people starting at a company, even though you get to know a lot of the system because you have to do bugs. Do you have any other examples for tasks which are good for onboarding people?
So one of the things that we like to do is if you have a well-groomed backlog and you have an idea of what is time critical and what are things that you need to work on eventually. So we have smaller features that mirror implementations that already exist. And so you have a sort of guideline for how to do the broad strokes of the particular feature, but this is something that, instead of something you need in 2 weeks, it's something that you might need a month from now or a month and a half from now. So there's no pressure. And again, it's something that we want them to be able to implement in a short amount of time, but by taking that immediate pressure off so that you're not breathing down their neck if they run into problems. But they also are able to look in your code base. And so if your code is well written and readable and you have good examples, they can say, okay, I want to implement something roughly this way. How do I tailor that and change that to what I'm implementing? And they can sort of piece together what they're doing using the building blocks for your own code.
How if you work in the code base and something changes, so your Scala style maybe changes a little bit, how do you update the code base? Because you may have old pieces and new pieces, and if I'm new and onboarding, then I maybe see both, and I'm not sure which one to use. So how do you handle this?
That has definitely happened, and I would say that the person that committed that change to the style guide and was passionate about that has to go make that happen in our code base. And they're going to wind up submitting a pretty giant pull request. Hopefully it's more red than green. But yeah, that's definitely happened. And so when the changes happen to your style guide, you should proactively update your code base to make sure you're still respecting it. That's very important.
And again, this is, if you do have someone bringing up that this is confusing, that should be a sign to you that needs to be fixed. Because sometimes you will miss something in a code when you do the full updates. And this is a time for you to learn from your new hire and say, okay, this is some inconsistencies and we should put that maybe in our backlog or have them bring it up to date using the style guide, which is another good example of a small task to start with. Yes?
Yeah, well, last question.
These interview processes are targeted for the explicitly for the Scala developers. What is your success rate?
I'm sorry, what is our...
What is your success rate? So how many candidates have you got?
So I would say since kind of formalizing this process, since moving to PayPal, we've hired 8 engineers on the team. So off the top of my head, I would say our on-site kind of offer rate is about 25%. And I would say, you want to make sure that when you're bringing people on-site, you should be pretty excited about them at that point, and you want to do most of your screening at the kind of initial reach out and initial phone screen level. All right, thank you.